Thank you all for joining today's webinar on early possession. I'll start with and it's a lot of familiar faces, so I'll try to keep the intro brief. I've been a real estate lawyer for about 20 years. My name is Usman Mohammed, as you probably know. In 2017, I founded a law firm, Consensus Legal. We focus on commercial leasing and sales transactions. Many of you are brokers. Broker referrals are a large part of our practice at Consensus Legal. We're accustomed to working with brokers hand in hand. AIR CRE contracts, they are excellent contracts. As you know, you probably use them in your work. They just make transactions easier and more efficient, less negotiation when you have a starting point that is familiar to all parties. You may or may not know AIR, which started in Los Angeles and in California, has expanded its AIR CRE contracts. I think they're close to being in all 50 states plus the District of Columbia. I don't know, they might be at 46 or 47. For out-of-state transactions, I've seen a lot of people starting to use the AIR CRE contracts as well. So today's webinar is on early possession. This is paragraph 3 of the AIR CRE lease and other provisions, other subparagraphs as well. I have a few topics to cover and to discuss with you all. As usual, please feel free to raise your hand or to ask questions verbally or in the chat box. This is not a lecture, it's discussion. I'll be presenting for about 20 minutes and then I'll stay on for about 20 minutes of Q&A as well. Legal disclaimers before I begin. We are not affiliated with or sponsored by AIR CRE. I am not providing legal advice during these webinars. It is for education and discussion purposes. Okay, so without further ado, I am going to share my screen, the AIR CRE single tenant net lease. And we'll start with subparagraph 1.4, early possession. So many of you, if you're a broker, I see this so frequently in letters of intent and leases that brokers prepare. There are frequently 3 triggers for lessee's early possession. Number 1, that the lease is signed. Number 2, that the lessee pays the amounts due upon execution of the lease, security deposit, first month rent, etc. And 3, the third frequent condition or trigger I see from brokers is that the lessee has provided evidence of the insurance required by the lease. And once those 3 conditions are satisfied, the LOI says, or 1.4 frequently says, a lot of you enter this into the blank here in 1.4. Once those 3 conditions are satisfied, then lessee is entitled to early possession of the premises. So that third trigger that I just mentioned, that the insurance required by the lease is provided by lessee, although we frequently and brokers frequently add that to 1.4, I'll start with this issue. Is it required for brokers and for attorneys to put this into the blank in 1.4, that lessee has provided the evidence required, the evidence of insurance required? And the answer to that is it is technically not necessary. In 3.4 here, it says, lessor shall not be required to tender possession of the premises to lessee until lessee complies with its obligation to provide evidence of insurance. So from a technical perspective, it's not required that you include that in the blank in 1.4. But as a practical matter, I think this is something that lawyers can take away and learn from brokers. I recommend that it is in 1.4 because it's such a key item before the landlord, the lessor provides possession to lessee. Why not make it clear? Why not, even if the lessee is represented by an attorney in the lease negotiation, by including that insurance requirement in 1.4 in this blank, it's just so easy, and it avoids like a tenant, a lessee forgetting about this requirement. So even though it's not required because of that other provision in the AIR CRE lease, I like to put it, and I recommend that the real estate attorneys at our firm include it in 1.4 as a condition before lessee is entitled to early possession. So that's the first item I wanted to go over. So then the next item I would like to go over is, well, let me give you a pop quiz. Let's say you have an early possession date of October 1 and a commencement date of November 1. And let's say that the prior lessee holds over and they're not out by September 30. They hold over until October 15. Under that scenario, what happens to lessee's 1 month of early possession? Do they get that 1 month of early possession? Because it was an early possession date of October 1, a commencement date, early possession date of October 1, a commencement date of November 1, but the premises is not available until October 15 because of a holdover by the prior lessee. Does lessee get the entire month of early possession, or do they lose the 15 days in October, and do they only get early possession for the last 15 days of October? And I see a couple comments in the chat box by Mark and Martin and Mike. Both of you, all three of you are correct. In that scenario, lessee loses the 15 days of early possession. I will just show you the provision in the AIR CRE lease that addresses that. Paragraph 3.2, any provision herein granting lessee early possession of the premises is subject to and conditioned upon the premises being available for such possession prior to the commencement date. So lessee loses it. And this provision in the AIR CRE lease is consistent with other commercial, kind of the norms in commercial leasing. The next sentence in paragraph 3.2, the grant of early possession conveys a non-exclusive right to occupy the premises. So lessor can do work if under the lease, lessor is required to do some work in the premises before the commencement date is triggered, for example. It can do that work at the same time that that lessee receives early possession of the premises. Okay, so what the next topic is rent. Is lessee required to pay base rent during the period of early possession? Anyone have an answer? Ty, Mark, Martin, other people saying no, not required to pay rent, base rent. Someone said yes. So the answer again is in paragraph 3.2, and it's right here. base rent shall be abated for the period of early possession. So lessee is not required to pay base rent during the period of early possession. Okay, next question. What about additional rent? Let's say it's a triple net lease and lessee has to pay, those triple nets. Is lessee required to pay the additional rent during the period of early possession? I see a lot of comments in the chat box. Most of you are saying, if not all of you, are saying yes. And the answer, once again, is in paragraph 3.2. And it says here, all other terms of this lease, including but not limited to the obligations to pay real property taxes and insurance premiums and to maintain the premises, shall be in effect during the period of early possession. So yes, additional rent, so to speak, is required to be paid during the period of early possession. Now, this is, I want to go over additional rent in the various AIR CRE leases, because we have net leases, we have gross leases, obviously we have single tenant, we have multi-tenant. So during that period of early possession, in these various leases, what additional rent is required to be paid? This is going to be kind of a little bit of an overview of what additional rent is required to be paid in these various leases. So in these triple net leases, in these net leases, I should say, from AIR CRE, there's a few of them. During the period of early possession, all three buckets have to be paid, right? Taxes, insurance, and CAMs. But there is one exception to the net leases. And that exception is in the shopping center lease. So in the shopping center lease, lessee does have to pay expenses, the additional rent during the early possession period, but that happens only when it has opened for business in the premises. So if they get early possession, maybe it's a couple of months of early possession, but it hasn't opened its store, its space in the shopping center. In that situation, under the shopping center lease, lessee does not have to pay the additional rent. It's only after it opens for business. So that's the one exception in the net leases, and that's consistent with retail leasing standards. So AIR, once again, included that nuance in the retail, in the shopping center lease. What about gross leases? In this single tenant, in the single tenant lease gross, lessee is unlikely to pay any additional rent during the early possession period, because in that lease, lessee is only paying increases in taxes and increases in insurance. There's no CAMs because it's a single tenant lease. In the multi-tenant lease gross, CAMs are due. So in the multi-tenant lease gross, sometimes called an industrial gross lease, the lessee is responsible to pay increases in taxes and increases in insurance, but they pay all the CAMs, not just increases in CAMs. So in the multi-tenant lease gross, during that period of early possession, lessee is not going to pay increases in taxes and insurance because they won't have increased if the early possession period is short, but they will pay the CAMs. I'll get into some of the other additional rent paid during early possession in the other leases, but I just wanted to pause there because there's a lot of concepts, I think. Any questions? And I'm going to check the chat box as well. Okay, I don't see any questions, so I will continue to move on. So we talked about the single tenant gross lease and the multi-tenant gross lease. And Irene asked to repeat in the multi-tenant lease gross what lessee pays. So during the period of early possession, lessee will not pay taxes and insurance because under the multi-tenant lease gross, lessee is only responsible to pay increases in taxes and increases in insurance. Because it's an industrial gross lease, you can say. But lessee is required to pay under the multi-tenant lease gross, lessee is required to pay all the CAMs, not just increases in CAMs. So during that period of early possession, it will be required to pay that one bucket of CAMs, but not the insurance and taxes, because if the early possession period is, let's say, 1 month, it's very likely the taxes and insurance have not increased beyond the base year, so to speak. And I'll move on to the other gross leases. And there's the office lease gross. And that is going to be a little different because in that office lease gross, lessee only pays increases over the base year. So whether it's CAMs, insurance, or taxes, those are kind of base year leases, right? So in those office leases, lessee is not going to pay any additional rent during the period of early possession because those expenses likely have not increased in that short period of early possession. And then finally, there's 2 gross leases that are not frequently used, the land lease gross and the multi-tenant month-to-month lease gross. And in those 2 leases, no additional rent is paid, whether it's early possession or during the term of the lease. So then, so during early possession, there's no additional rent that's due. The last item I'll go over before opening it up for Q&A is again a pop quiz. We talked about the monetary amounts that are due during the period of early possession. What about non-monetary obligations? The lessee obviously has all sorts of non-monetary obligations under a lease document. Which non-monetary obligations is lessee required to comply with during the period of early possession? Anyone have an answer? David says maintain the property. Ty says all obligations. Mark says all obligations. All 3 of you are correct. Lessee during the period of early possession is required to comply with all other terms of this lease. That includes the obligation to repair and maintain the premises. So those repair and maintenance obligations begin not at the commencement date, they begin upon the early possession date. And a bit of a review from the August webinar, I mentioned in that webinar that the warranty periods in 2.2, they apply, they begin the 6-month warranty for HVAC and 30 days for all other elements. Those begin from the early possession date. So, just keep that in mind as an item of review. And the obligation to obtain service contracts, those have to be in effect within 30 days. Those also begin from the early possession date, not the commencement date. So with that, I will end the presentation portion, and I will stay on for any questions you may have. Feel free to unmute and ask the question, or you can also put it in the chat box. Any questions? Ty has a question about subleasing standards. Happy to get into that, Ty. Let's just see if anyone has any questions about early possession. And once we're done with any of those questions, then I'll address the subleasing one, if that's okay. David asks, when does a stated rent abatement period begin? I think, David, your question may relate to, we talked about holdover, and what if a holdover tenant cuts into an early possession period? We talked about that there would be the lessee just loses the early possession. But your question also relates to, what if the holdover goes beyond the early possession period? And let's say the first month of rent is supposed to be abated. And, in that scenario where it's a November 1 commencement date, if possession is delivered on November 15, does lessee lose half a month of that November base rent abatement? And I think that might be what you're getting at. And the answer to that question is in the next paragraph, the delay in possession paragraph. And here it says that if possession is delayed, lessee shall not be obligated to pay rent or perform its other obligations until lessor delivers possession, and any period of rent abatement that lessee would have otherwise enjoyed shall run from the date of delivery of possession. And the lessee in that scenario would get its 1 month of rent abatement. If I didn't answer your question, please feel free to follow up. And I'm looking in the chat box. Does it start with early possession or the commencement date? David asked, maybe you can clarify, I'm not sure what you're referring to there. Amanda asks, under an industrial gross single tenant lease, which provision explains that the tenant must pay the increase in insurance and tax? Okay, Amanda, those are in paragraph 8 and paragraph 12. So in paragraph 8 of the single tenant lease gross, it describes that lessee is responsible to pay increases in taxes above the base premium, it's called. And the base premium is the insurance that lessor, the cost of the insurance lessor has paid in the prior 12 months. And then paragraph 10 of that lease describes that lessee is responsible for increases in property taxes. David clarified his question. Does a stated rent abatement period begin with the early possession date or the commencement date? So it really depends on how, David, it's a good question, on how the lease is drafted. But most of the time, what we see in an LOI and even in the lease is that, you know, the rent abatement will be described as months 1, 2, 13, and 14, for example. Or it'll say January and February 2025. So the way I interpret like month 1, 2, 13, and 14 is from the commencement date. And the reason I interpret it that way is normally if it's a 60-month lease, if it's a 5-year lease, it'll be described, and I'll share the screen, it'll be described typically in paragraph 1. You know, it'll be described here in 1.3 as 5 years and 0 months, or 0 years and 6, I'm sorry, 0 years and 60 months. And so when you describe it as a 60-month lease, people usually describe it from the commencement date. So if you say months 1 and 2, it's usually implied that it's month 1 and 2 beginning from the commencement date, not the early possession date. But yeah, you do have to be a little careful to make sure that it's not described in a way where you're talking about rent abatement during the early possession period, because that's already built into the early possession paragraph that we discussed. Amanda has a question. Mike Cantor, okay. Hey, Mike, nice seeing you yesterday at the AIR golf event. So if Mike's question, so if early possession is longer than warranty period, early possession is 38 days, and typical warranty period for most items are 30 days. What if something is discovered after the warranty period while tenant doesn't have exclusive occupancy? And or would material change apply if damage and or defects is identified post 30 days while landlord's TIs are taking place during the early possession period? So with respect to that 30-day warranty period that Mike is referring to, it's, I'm sorry, I went past it. It's in paragraph 2.2 of the lease. That 30-day period, which begins from the start date, the start date here is in the AIR lease is defined as the earlier of early possession or the commencement date. So yeah, Mike, you bring up a good point. It's a good question. If something is discovered 38 days after early possession, then you're outside of a 30-day warranty period. And we frequently discuss this with our tenant clients oftentimes, and some of them will want to change that 30-day trigger of the warranty period from the early possession date or the start date to the commencement date. So that's something that can be negotiated. Where in the AIR, Rick asks, hi Rick, hope all is well. Where in the AIR lease does it state who is responsible for the fire sprinkler annual certification? Good question. Maybe we can see if there's any other early possession questions, and then maybe Rick, if you can remind me after we get through any early possession questions. And we may be done with any early possession questions. So I will end the webinar. I'll stay on to answer these off-topic questions, but for now, I will end the recording. But before I do so, I just wanted to thank all of you. If you are leaving, appreciate your participation. Please provide any feedback by email or in the chat box. Your feedback is always appreciated. I was thinking about going through the lease. We did in August, we did paragraph 2. We're doing part of paragraph 3 now in September. I was thinking about just going through it paragraph by paragraph, month by month. Please feel free to give me your feedback by email if you think that makes sense, or if you have another suggestion. And I will end the recording and stay on for some additional questions. Thank you so much.